Diving into last night's Hall of Fame game, yes, of course, it is just a preseason game, but it signifies something so much bigger than that, considering that we are now going to have football to watch every Thursday from now through December 26th, I think is the last Thursday night football game. So we are big time back. And I do just want to sort of touch on what ended up being a very interesting night for a couple different reasons. For starters, we of course had the introduction of the new kickoff format. That was one of the biggest changes, I think, to the actual rule book that I have ever seen. And last night we got to see what it looked like on an NFL field. Now, we've seen similar iterations of this across other types of football leagues, but this is going to take a little bit of adjusting in the NFL. Ultimately, I don't think that the results ended up being all that much different. And we saw the NFL, they were contemplating the idea of taking kickoffs out of the game altogether, because it just sort of turned into, especially by the end last year, just a nothing play that there was really no purpose to it anymore at that point. And I do honestly think that this could be sort of a fun rule to work into it. Now, I don't even know what the general consensus on this is, so maybe I'm on an island here. But I think for starters, the fact that you can 100% see how much safer it is for a lot of these players, that it, after I played high school football, so nowhere near the same level of athletes you're going up against, but it results in some big time stingers, the way that you have these, again, grown men, top tier athletes sprinting straight towards you, and the whole running back and flipping and trying to lay the block. I can 100% see why that is a health concern, and it's an interesting wrinkle here that maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I feel like I heard Troy Aikman say that the NFL isn't committed to it entirely long term, that they may be willing to adjust after this year, but I was kind of cool with it. As much as I did talk about player safety, as I was sort of writing down in my notes about that, I did end up watching Tyler Scott get smoked, the return man for the Bears, at the beginning of that second quarter after the Texans field goal drive. He ended up just getting absolutely laid out, but that's besides the point. So still get your hard collisions there for all of you, old-time traditional NFL fans. So I think it'll be interesting for sure to see how that progresses. But there weren't many starters out for either one of these teams. The Bears announced that across the board, they were not going to be starting any of their number ones. The Texans, we got to see a couple players that I was particularly interested in, actually, where they had a couple of their younger starting offensive linemen in Juice Scruggs and Kenyon Green, both for picks in the first 2 days of their past couple drafts, and I think that they ultimately looked pretty good. And the time that they did play for, they were in on the first 2 drives. The Texans were able to score on both of those, got some really good push from the offensive line. So these are 2 players for the Texans that would really be nice to see them develop, as they are going to try and be looking to add more to that run game over the past couple years that hasn't been all that successful. But now you're looking at an offense with CJ Stroud. You feel like you have that pass game, and you could become a really elite, all-around, well-rounded team. But that offensive line is going to have to take a step forward this year. You have some of the more reliable veterans that got the night off. Of course, most notably is Laramie Tunsil at the left tackle position. But again, you still look across the board, they're pretty average. I'd say Shaq Mason, though, is, a former Pro Bowler, I believe, and, it's going to be up front in the middle of that offensive line. Having Green and Scruggs get the reps last night, it was something that I at least was looking for. Obviously, it's not everybody's, go-to scouting report when you come away from this game, but I also liked watching Cade Stover, the tight end out of Ohio State that the Texans drafted this past year. And I really liked Cade Stover in college, and I thought that he ultimately had a pretty good game for himself where he was involved on a few run plays. There was one broken play where Cade Stover wasn't able to get to the other edge and set the block on the other end, ended up getting his quarterback at that point, lit up a little bit, but I do think that Stover ultimately looked pretty good in this game. And, the other wacky part of this game that I can't believe I haven't even mentioned yet was the fact that, of course, it was dismissed during the third quarter due to weather delays. So that was definitely a little wrinkle that was thrown into the mix there. But, at the same time, it's the Hall of Fame game of all preseason games. I was excited to just watch football, obviously, and I tried to pick up again with Scruggs and Kenyon Green, with Cade Stover, tried to pick up on as much as I could of things that could end up impacting the regular season, but ultimately, that's not usually what you're expecting to get out of preseason games. For whatever it's worth, the Bears are headed into a season with a new offensive coordinator, considering the fact that the past few years with Justin Fields just flat out did not work. So, ahead of this season, they decided to fire Luke Getsy, who was with the team for 2 seasons. They bring in Shane Waldron, and the Bears offense looked pretty good. Now, again, who knows how much stock you can actually put into it, but I've talked about the depth of their running back group, that I am fans of Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert. We got to see both of them in action last night. I think between the two of them, a combined 10 carries, so not anything crazy, but at least sort of cool to see there. And then ultimately it became the Brett Ripien and Colin Johnson show, where they hooked up for a few big time catches. Colin Johnson able to bring in 2 touchdowns, had a couple impressive passes. So, for whatever it's worth, the very first look at Shane Waldron in Chicago looked pretty good. We'll have to obviously see it continue to happen with actual starters in the game, but just again, something that I thought was noteworthy there, considering there was a changing in that department during the offseason. I did have a couple of those, I forgot that they signed there, this offseason players. Cam Akers making his return to the NFL. Obviously, a tough situation for Akers, considering the fact that he has been so injury-plagued throughout his young career so far. And, I think it's 2 torn, it's Achilles or ACLs that have gotten in the way of him. But I had forgotten that he signed with the Texans. He ended up scoring a touchdown, I believe, on a reception. So it was cool to see there. Also forgot Jonathan Owens signed with the Bears. So just, those moments always tend to happen when you're first getting back into the NFL season. But the last thing I sort of want to highlight with this game is I was actually very impressed with the overall production of what ESPN was able to put out last night. Watching the pregame show, it was Scott Van Pelt, Ryan Clark, Jason Kelsey, and Marcus Spears. And frankly, with ESPN, it seems like at times they sort of lean more so into the narrative and entertainment stuff as opposed to giving quite as much insight into the actual sports at times. Not going to name names here, but last night I thought they did an incredible job with everything, where Scott Van Pelt, he was really hosting the overall, studio show. They were sort of in and out with the rest of the players. Marcus Spears and Jason Kelsey, I thought that they were both tremendous. Ryan Clark as well during the halftime show when he was in with just Kelsey and SVP. That went really well. They did another segment as well with just Adam Schefter giving some news updates. So it kind of felt like a Scott Van Pelt NFL Live type of show, but actually inserted into a game situation. And frankly, I just feel like that's not something that we see happen all too much with a lot of these networks, where it's actual drawn out thoughts as opposed to a bunch of former players, coaches, and whatever, personalities just jammed onto a desk to take turns of giving these little 30-second, statements that I thought the flow of it was incredible for ESPN last night. So I don't know what their overall plan is. They did, of course, just sign Jason Kelce to a media deal following his retirement. Would love to see him involved in just that type of a vibe. I mean, let me know in the comments section what your thoughts were, because I thought that it was actually a very well run thing. And for whatever it's worth as well, TNT's Inside the NBA is coming to an end. That is everybody's favorite studio show, and it seems like, honestly, if they were to go that route of having Scott Van Pelt host the pregame, halftime, postgame show regularly when they do their Monday Night Football, and have that be a consistent thing, I would be fully on board for that. Now, maybe I'm putting way too much stock into this as somebody who is aspiring to be in sports media at some point, but something that I paid attention to, and honestly, I was really impressed with. So I'm going to be interested to see what they choose to do from here in regards of that studio show. But let me know what your overall thoughts on the game were. Again, sort of limited takeaways you can actually come away with, but definitely keeping an eye out for any types of starters or standout players throughout the preseason, because football's back, baby. So we're just getting excited about it. But on that note, we are going to be diving into one of the things that Adam Schefter actually touched upon during that halftime last night, and that was the Justin Herbert injury update, where he has something in his right foot that is going to be keeping him out for a handful of weeks now headed into the season. So we'll talk about what that is, what it looks like, and whether or not it is going to end up having an impact on the upcoming season for the LA Chargers. So we will dive into that, but first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.